Now, after looking at the Roman Catholic Church and the movement within the Roman Catholic Church, we now go on to look at the World Council of Churches and some of the different ways of approaching people of other religions that the World Council of Churches has also adopted in the past half century. The World Council of Churches was established in 1948 after the Second World War, and it includes most major Protestant denominations. It has nearly 400 member churches and denominations and fellowship in over 100 countries. So the World Council of Churches is a huge ecumenical body representing the Protestant tradition. The World Council of Churches and its member churches are those known with a very strong tradition and history of missions. And we know of the mission conferences that were held in 1920s, 1930s. Those mission conferences were what was turned back into what became the World Council of Churches. In fact, the mission conferences started in 1910. And at those conferences, the main discussions in the churches was how to evangelize the whole world, including, of course, the Muslim world. And these big conferences were held to strategize and come out with plans on how to go about evangelizing the whole world. The rest of the world was seen as dark. The only areas with light was the Western world. And all other people were called heathens. They were not people with proper religion. There was no hope of salvation for them, including the Muslims. And the Muslims were targets for evangelism, for conversion, just like any other religious group. So for decades, the World Council of Churches, member churches, denominations were involved in very coordinated conversion programs, evangelism programs in different countries. And their attitudes were formed accordingly. There is no truth. There can be no truth in any other religion apart from the Christian religion. In fact, in many of the denominations that make the World Council of Churches, the Roman Catholic Church itself was not a proper Christian denomination. The Eastern Orthodox churches, the Coptic churches were all targets for evangelism. Yet, just like the Roman Catholic Church, in the 1940s, 50s going, there was beginning to be a change of attitudes and mindset. That you can't continue to talk about the rest of the world religions being just darkness. There are sparks of light. It's not all just evil. There are sparks of goodness. It's not all just falsehood. There are sparks of truth in some of these religions. Because as missionaries went out, they encountered Muslims. They encountered Hindus. And they saw in some of the Muslims they met a genuine sense of religious piety and commitment. And they were like, this cannot be coming from the devil. This cannot all be darkness. And so that way, their attitudes began to change. And what they saw in the field began to challenge their own theology. And they began to make shifts and re-envision their own theology. This led up to 1971, when the World Council of Churches began to shift dramatically from missions to dialogue. That instead of going out there to want to evangelize and convert Muslims, we need to engage Muslims in conversations, in dialogue, in ways that are productive and beneficial to all of society. And so the World Council of Churches drew what was called Guidelines on Dialogue in 1971 in Chiang Mai. This document became a landmark document, and it prescribes principles, different forms of dialogue, and how to go about this dialogue. it spells out in the document different forms of what is called dialogue of life, theological dialogue, and spiritual dialogue. Dialogue of life is simply dialogue where Muslims and Christians intermingle in the daily affairs of business. And they intermingle in schools, in universities, in marketplaces. This is dialogue of life. It doesn't need to be structured. It just happens on its own. Dialogue, intellectual dialogue or theological dialogue is dialogue where Muslims and Christians come together to have conversations on theological issues. And then spiritual dialogue also is where Muslims and Christians begin to attend each other's worship and to observe, and where they feel comfortable, participate, and begin to get closer, even in the spiritual level. Now, this was in some places, very controversial, and therefore it became a challenge to many member churches. Nevertheless, the definition of dialogue in the World Council of Churches document is still significant. It talks about the fact that dialogue is between people. There can be no dialogue between faiths or religions or ideologies. Dialogue is not so much a matter of discussion as of relationship. Dialogue is between people, not ideologies, not religions, not just teachings. It is people who talk to each other. Religions don't talk to each other. It is people of religion who talk to each other. And the dialogue is aimed at change of attitudes, not change of beliefs, not change of theology, but change of attitude, change of Christian attitude towards Muslims, and change of Muslim attitude towards Christians. At dialogue sessions, nobody is asked to change their religious tradition or belief or faith or teaching. It is about adopting a new posture, a posture of respect towards the other religion. It's about relationships, and relationships take time to build and to develop. It has more to do with people than with ideas. Dialogue is a spirit, a mood, an attitude towards neighbors of other faith. Dialogue demands both speaking and listening, giving and receiving. Dialogue demands speaking and listening. You don't go to dialogue just to speak and speak and speak. You go to dialogue also to listen to the other side. You don't go to dialogue to give and give and give. You go to dialogue to receive also from the other side. And so the World Council of Churches became very much engaged in dialogue. And as I said, there are other forms in which dialogue can take place: dialogue of life, dialogue of action, dialogue, theological dialogue, and dialogue of religious experience or spiritual dialogue. These became a source of serious debates and conversations between amongst the different denominations that make up the World Council of Churches. Nevertheless, it has also become a very important part of present-day Christian-Muslim relations. Contemporary Christian-Muslim relations have evolved and moved forward, and it involves all these kinds of dialogue, forms of dialogue that the World Council of Churches espouse in the guidelines for dialogue amongst people of other religions.